both internal innovation, which obviously we have a lot going on, but also to look at external innovation. Yes. And so that's a focus for us. So advance the ball in CF, get ready for those near-term commercial launches, continue to advance the pipeline, and build and use our financial strength. That's what we're focused on.
Absolutely. So a ton going on there. Maybe just starting with CF first. Obviously continuing to execute around the world with Trikafta, as well as new countries and new populations. One of the interesting things is that you have a improved version of that drug with phase 3 data that comes in early 2024, Vanza. It's once a day, not twice a day, and there's some other potential benefits. Can you just talk a little bit about how investors should look at the result that is coming in a few months, and tell us how important it is to be non-inferior, which is the primary endpoint, versus superior, which some people would like to see, and what are the commercial or ramifications of each of those results?
Sure, yeah, so we just announced our Q3 results, where we had another great quarter of growth in cystic fibrosis. As you said, that's built on getting to more patients around the world, expanding our label down to younger and younger age groups. We're now approved for Trikafta down to 2 to 5-year-olds in the US, and we have applications pending around the world for that. That's a big part of what we're trying to do, is to get to patients younger and younger in life. Then you have to get reimbursement agreements, and then you have to launch. And the team's been doing a fantastic job around the world doing that. We updated our guidance to approximately $9.85 billion for this year, up from the previous range of 9.7 to 9.8. If we achieve that, that'll be another year of double-digit growth for the company. It'll be our 9th successive year of double-digit growth in cystic fibrosis, which is a tribute to the way the team's executing. But as you've said, we have an improved version. Our goal in CF is always to get to everybody with cystic fibrosis, develop medicines for everybody with cystic fibrosis, and deliver increasing levels of clinical benefit. And that's what we believe the Vanza-Kafta triple combination offers us. Essentially, we are trying to get all patients to carrier levels of chloride transport, which is essentially the level of chloride transport, or CFTR function, that the parents of kids with CF have. The parents of kids with CF don't have the symptoms of cystic fibrosis as we know it. So if we can get children with CF down to carrier levels of chloride transport, our hope is we'll essentially be able to prevent them developing CF as we know it today. The Vanza-Kafta triple combination, based on our in vitro data but also our clinical data, we believe has the prospects of delivering greater levels of CFTR function as measured by sweat chloride, and that's what we're focused on. So the trial, as you said, is a head-to-head study. The regulatory endpoint is a non-inferiority versus Trikafta on FEV1. Obviously, that's a very high bar. Trikafta delivers incredible clinical benefit, but we'll also be looking at other markers of disease, such as sweat chloride. Sweat chloride is the pharmacodynamic marker of CFTR function in people. And we believe if we can show equivalent levels of FEV1, but greater levels of CFTR function as measured by sweat chloride, and the fact that the combination is once a day, that will be a compelling profile to patients and physicians. And we've certainly done sufficient market research to validate that hypothesis. The fact that improved CFTR function leads to superior outcomes is not something that's not difficult, that's not hard for people to imagine.
I like to imagine, but do the payers in the US and do payers or governments abroad view with confidence and agree with you that that is a profile that is reimbursable and viable over Trikafta for just sweat chloride superiority versus FEV?
It's hard to talk about payers in the hypothetical because they're going to want to see the data, which obviously makes sense. But let me remind you, in a number of countries, we have our portfolio agreements, which essentially envisage a world where we've already told people, this is our strategy, this is what we're going to deliver, we're looking to continue to increase the level of clinical benefit. So for a number of countries, we already have agreements in place which imagine our future product launches and future development. So, and then we'll have to see what the data shows. But again, the link that patients with more severe CF have worse CFTR function and higher levels of sweat chloride is well known. Indeed, that's how CF is diagnosed. And so it's not a great leap of faith to imagine the reverse. If you're improving CFTR function, as shown by lower levels of sweat chloride, that will lead over time to improved clinical outcomes.
I think because of the contracts that are, I guess, package, I'm not sure.
Portfolio agreements, yep.
Agreements, and in the U.S. where it's more straightforward, that there should be no issue with that. One of the things at Wall Street I think we're working to get clarity on is trying to explain to Wall Street why sweat chloride should be a very, very relevant and acceptable surrogate for clinical outcomes, because the street doesn't know anything kind of beyond FEV.
Right.
So that is something that the message is that you guys are pushing
Indeed.
forward. Hopefully people understand that, but they're still trying to get comfortable with that.
And FEV1, just a couple of other points on that moment. FEV1 is obviously a very important short-term outcome.
Yes.
But as you have seen from the real-world data we've generated with Trikafta, some of those longer-term outcomes, the results are even more impressive. So if you look at reductions in hospital exacerbations, these very severe infections that lead them to being hospitalized, dramatic reductions. If you look at increases in survival, dramatic increases. If you look at reductions in lung transplants, in some countries, there hasn't been a lung transplant in a CF patient for over a year.
Because of the drug.
And that's because of CFTR modulators. So the short-term impacts are important, but the long-term impacts are what are the really important clinical outcomes. Last thing I'll say is about vanzacaftor. People get very focused on the transition, on transition patients. Are people going to switch from Trikafta to vanzacaftor if it comes along, if it's the same on FEV1? What I think a lot of people are forgetting is there are about 6,000 plus patients around the world who've tried our current CFTR modulators and have had to discontinue.
What percent is that?
It's about 10%-ish of patients who've been
Because remember, you already have like
initiated.
the highest compliance rates.
We have the highest persistence and
90
compliance
something
I've ever seen. Yeah, I mean, persistence is about 90% or so, so only about 10% or so of people over time ever discontinue.
Okay.
And then our compliance rates are in the mid-80s, which is as high as I've ever seen in any disease area.
And you believe people,
So those people have already demonstrated that they want to be on a CFTR modulator, but they've had to discontinue for a variety of different reasons. So I do believe that is a population who will be very interested in a new treatment option being available. So I know people get very focused on the switch, how many people are going to switch from Trikafta to vanzacaftor. I personally am not as focused on that as I am on how many new patients might be interested in a new treatment option if vanzacaftor gets approved.
Beyond just the people who, what are the convenience,
Once a day.
better efficacy, not a huge risk to switch over to the new one. That is a very common and well-accepted pharmaceutical approach to get them on the better drug,
Right.
As well as patients who are not on a drug, so that is additive to revenue.
Correct.
If those new patients get on. Okay, so the next huge opportunity that people are rightfully focused on because of an opioid epidemic and other huge problems in the pain space is the opportunity for new oral pain therapy. You have phase 2 chronic DPN, or diabetic peripheral neuropathy, data coming up by the end of the year. So
Correct.
last I checked, we got a month and a half left, as well as phase 3 acute data. Talk to the audience about the chronic diabetic peripheral neuropathy opportunity versus the acute opportunity.
Sure.
One is a short-term duration, but a lot of people. The other is a chronic indication, a lot of people as well. But people are thinking about this as chronic is really the big one, and acute, smaller, but still important.
So let's just go back to the why are we doing this? There hasn't been a new class of pain med in decades. We're still using the same things we've used for 30, 40, 50 years, reformulated version, but there hasn't been a new class of pain med in absolutely decades. And the approach we're taking is to try and attack the underlying human biology of pain, which is the way pain is signaled to the brain. So there are specific pain receptors, there are specific pain neurons in the body. That's all they do is transmit the pain signal. And essentially there are 2 sodium channels. One initiates the pain signal, that's NaV 1.7. The other one propagates the pain signal, that's NaV 1.8. So we and many, many others for decades have been working in the pain space. In fact, we've been working on pain longer than we've been working on cystic fibrosis, so over 25 years. So what we have with VX548 is a very potent and selective NaV 1.8 inhibitor, which we've developed and demonstrated in phase 2 studies in acute pain, has a great profile. As you said, we have 2 different studies ongoing. So let's talk about the pain market. We segment the pain market essentially into 3 areas: acute pain, neuropathic pain, which is obviously chronic pain, and then there is kind of chronic nociceptive pain, which is everything else you might think of. It could be osteoarthritic knee pain, it could be lots of Back pain, apart from lumbosacral radiculopathy, which we'll come back to. But is a whole host of other inflammatory conditions, nociceptive pain, huge opportunity, but very primary care. The areas we're focused on are acute and chronic neuropathic pain. So acute pain, let's just talk about the US, where we've got the best data on the number of patients. Acute pain, there's approximately 80 million patients in the US each year will have acute pain episodes that require a prescription medication. 80 million a year. There are billions of prescriptions written. The vast majority of them are generic. As I said, there's not been a new class of pain med in absolute decades. Despite that, this is a multi-billion-dollar market in the US alone. So our belief is if we can bring a product forward which has great efficacy on pain and doesn't have the adverse effects, including addictive potential of things like opioids, that will be a huge opportunity in acute pain.
And by the way, when we say
US.
acute pain, talking about severe acute pain, we're talking about first there's one in bunionectomy, one in abdominoplasty, and one in other.
Correct.
We're not talking about pain where they're prescribing kind of low-level pain.
Yeah, so we are
severe pain
yes.
after like a procedure.
Yeah, well, we are seeking a label for moderate to severe acute pain.
Okay.
That's the label that we're seeking from the FDA, irrespective of the cause of that pain.
Okay.
So we are doing studies, as you rightly said, in phase 3, one in abdominoplasty, one in bunionectomy, and then we have an all-comers study.
Okay.
We're doing those because those are well-established pain models for regulatory approval, but the label we're seeking is for broad, moderate to severe acute pain, irrespective of the cause. So it could be surgery, but it could be trauma, it could be a fall, it could be a burn. Acute pain is essentially defined by time. Okay. So it's the length of the prescription that you would receive, it's the treatment of pain for less than 90 days.
Okay.
So that's the acute pain market. And then, as you said, we have 3 studies ongoing. We will be unblinding all of that data, looking at it and reporting out on it all at the same time, because they are essentially a package of studies, and we need to know exactly what's happened in all of them to know exactly what our path forward will be. Okay. That will be in the beginning of 2024, when we will have all that data, have looked at it, analyzed it, and be in a position to be able to decide what we're going to do and share that data. That's acute pain, okay. Phase 3 program. Okay. Neuropathic pain, we're in phase 2. Neuropathic pain is an umbrella term that describes a whole category of different diseases, but are all characterized by damage to the nerves. Diabetic peripheral neuropathy is one type of it, small fibril neuropathy, trigeminal neuralgia. There's a variety of different causes of pain, but they're all in this bucket of neuropathic pain. We have a phase 2 study ongoing in diabetic peripheral neuropathy. We will have the results. We'll unblind that study. We'll look at those results and report out on those by the end of this year. Neuropathic pain in total, there's about 10 million people in the US who receive a prescription for neuropathic pain every year. As I said, it's a collection of areas. We've just said on our Q3 call that we are starting another phase 2 study in a different type of neuropathic pain called lumbosacral radiculopathy. Between those 2 pain states, of the total number, the 10 million patients who have neuropathic pain, about 20% of them have diabetic peripheral neuropathy, and about 40% of them have LSR, lumbosacral radiculopathy. So that's where that program is. We'll have the DPN data by the end of this year. We're just beginning the study in LSR. Again, what we're looking for is a package of data that will enable us to get a broad label for neuropathic pain. That is our intent. As you said, neuropathic pain, fewer patients at 10 million, but those patients are being treated chronically. These are chronic pain conditions.
I would remind folks that Lyrica, Neurontin. These are the big branded drugs that were approved. There's others, but those were 2 of the biggest ones. Lyrica was doing around 5 to 7 billion peak.
Correct.
So that's the opportunity. That was like a decade ago.
And our estimate is about 3 billion of that was in neuropathic pain, because it had a range of different indications. Not surprisingly, I mean, these are repurposed CNS medicines. Right. I mean, that's the thing to remember about these things. They work in the CNS. They're not actually, they're changing the perception of pain. They're not actually tackling the underlying cause of pain. A bit like opioids, they work centrally. These are repurposed anti-anxiolytics, anti-epileptics, etc.
So 2 questions. One is, coming away from the 3rd quarter earnings call, one of the big announcements was that Vertex was starting the second pain phase 2. So naturally people said, well, how can you invest, in your chief operating officer, how can you guys invest X amount, throw out a number, $50 million, you could tell me if that's kind of a phase 2 result, $50 million to go start a study. You start $50 million, but the first pain study, chronic neuropathic pain, is literally reading out in a month.
Yeah.
So they go, Stu, how are you going to spend $50 million? Why don't you just wait a month to see the results? Or maybe Vertex already knows that the results are good.
Yeah, so let me address that last point. We do not know the results. The results have not been unblinded. Nobody in the company has seen the results of the ongoing DPN study. That's not why we began the study in LSR. The reason why we've been looking at LSR is the underlying biology is exactly the same. It's caused by nerve impairment. That's what's causing LSR. The reason why we were able to start the DPN study previously is DPN is a tried and tested type of neuropathic pain. Multiple products have been approved for diabetic peripheral neuropathy, including Lyrica, so there's an established regulatory path, there's an established market for it. So that's why we were looking at DPN first. Nothing has ever been approved in the United States for LSR. So we had to work with the regulators to work through a path, or what would the studies look like that would give them and us confidence that we're working in that disease area. We've just concluded those discussions with the regulators. That's what's allowed us to start the study. And it's a very important population, because as I said, 40% of patients, 40% of the 10 million patients treated for neuropathic pain in the US are treated because they have a diagnosis of LSR. So it's a very important disease in its own right.
It's almost half of the, you said 40%.
It's 40, just over 40%.
So it's an important indication.
It's very important.
So,
and nothing approved.
one of the other, one of the data points that are coming up when this result reads out, which is in a month and a half or so, within the next
Within a month and a half, yeah.
is that you're trying to beat a placebo in diabetic peripheral neuropathy. That is the primary analysis. And there's also an active control arm of Lyrica. Can you explain to investors how important it is to compare to that result? What is the relevance of that? Some people are like, do you expect that your drug is as good as Lyrica? You want it to be billions of dollars. If it's numerically lower, how important is that? How relevant is that?
Yep.
Is it possibly better than Lyrica?
Yep.
Can you talk about those different
Sure.
scenarios and how to interpret
Yep.
the active control arm?
So I think the first important thing is to understand the design of the study. So the design of the study is there to show proof of concept that 548 works in diabetic peripheral
Beat a
neuropathy.
placebo, yes.
And so we are comparing patients being treated with their own baseline. We have a reference arm, which is is Lyrica,
Yeah.
and it is there for context. The study is not going to be big enough to be able to statistically compare between any of the doses in phase 2 for 548 and the Lyrica arm. It is there for context because we know it's going to be an important thing for us to consider as we go into phase 3. But you will not be able to do statistical comparisons between whatever we see with the doses of 548 and what we see with the Lyrica arm. I would encourage people to look back. We did the same thing in phase 2 in acute pain.
Yes.
In our acute pain studies, we did compare 548 with placebo. We also had a reference arm which had an opioid in it, but again, it was there for context for us to look at, to provide some reference. It's not there for statistical comparisons. If we were trying to power a phase 2 study for that, it would be huge. Well, that's not what we want to do.
So is the idea, and I've actually never asked David Altshuler this, is the idea that the efficacy level of this drug similar to a Lyrica? If you go back to the acute studies, it was similar to Vicodin. I'll use the word similar. And is that the idea, that this is about as good as those drugs, or is it better? Or
we are looking overall for it to have a better benefit-risk profile than anything else that's out there. So let's think about opioids. Opioids have great efficacy in general, but a terrible tolerability profile, not just the addictive potential, and they have addictive potential. So overall, we're looking for a package of data which has a better benefit-risk profile. Same thing with the gabapentinoids and things like that. They have variable efficacy. They don't work in everybody. And they also have a significant tolerability profile, largely by the fact that they work in the CNS. So again, overall, we're looking for a better benefit-risk profile. That could be better efficacy. That could be equivalent efficacy and better side effects. But overall, we're looking for a better benefit-risk profile in both acute pain and in neuropathic pain against the relevant standards of care. And the relevant standards of care in acute pain is typically opioids. In neuropathic pain, it's typically considered to be the gabapentin.
I think, and I'll say this too with the acute studies that are reading out, if you guys have a clinically meaningful, and I'd say Wall Street views clinically meaningful as, in kind of in any disease, at least a 15 or 20% reduction or improvement in the result, that is a win. You guys will file that in acute. In chronic, a win against placebo of 20% is solid. I'm sure you're going to advance forward. Wall Street's like, is it as good as the control arm? You know, they want to use it as a reference point, and so people are trying to look at that.
Understood.
Okay. Lastly, in just 2 minutes, I would be remiss to not say that obviously you have a PDUFA date in the U.S. for sickle cell and transfusion-independent beta thalassemia. I'll start with just sickle cell because that is the majority of the U.S. market per se and commercial opportunity. Your confidence on approval and the launch, can you just tell us in a minute or so how to think about and understand the launch, because people have watched gene therapy not be so great.
Sure.
$2 million.
So yeah, we have a PDUFA date in the U.S. for sickle cell disease is December the 8th.
December 8th.
Our PDUFA date for transfusion-dependent thalassemia is March 30th. So the approval is just in sickle cell disease. As you say, sickle cell disease is the bigger patient population in the U.S. Overall, we think there's about 32,000 patients worldwide who are in the U.S. and the EU who are likely to be good candidates for exa-cel given the current busulfan-based conditioning regimen. So these are patients at the more severe end of the scale who are experiencing multiple pain crises or having transfusions every 3 or 4 weeks. Of that 32,000, about 25,000 are sickle cell disease. Of those, the majority, about 18,000 or so, are in the United States.
18,000, okay.
So it is the bigger opportunity between the US and Europe. It's the bigger opportunity in the US. Our confidence in the approval, the data looks great. As you probably know, we had an advisory committee with the FDA, was it last week or the week before? It was very recently, which was focused specifically not on the benefit risk profile, which they seem to accept, but on the question of off-target editing. And so we are feeling good about the data. Obviously, it's in the gift of the FDA, so we await their judgment. But what I will tell you is we're launch ready. We're excited about the opportunity to bring this to market. What we have said is, this is not this is a complex and long procedure for a patient to go through. This is a multi-month procedure.
Many months to get
that somebody has to go through. So if you're a sickle cell disease patient, once you and your physician have identified that you want to have a gene therapy like our CRISPR-Cas9 based gene editing therapy, they have to have transfusions for 8 weeks to prepare them for the mobilization and apheresis phase. Then they have to come in often for 2 rounds of apheresis to collect their stem cells. Then those cells are sent to our manufacturing facilities to be edited. Then they have to be tested and quality controlled before they're released. Then they have to be shipped back to the transplant center. Then the patient has to schedule that into their lives, because they will probably be in hospital for some 4 to 6 weeks as part of the procedure, because you have to have your bone marrow ablated to receive the therapy. So this is a multi-month journey that the patient is embarking on, and I just think that's an important consideration for people to think about. This is not like they're all going to get initiated on day one.
Once we get approved, there will be some time as we get to 2024 for actually getting the drug.
Correct.
So we have some time to prepare for that, educate, and Wall Street will be focused on that, as well as the pain results coming out. So a lot to look forward to. Appreciate it, and we all eagerly look forward to the results.
Thank you, Mike. Appreciate it.
Appreciate it. Thank you.